And Bernie Sanders is riding high after a clean sweep of this weekend's caucuses. The Vermont senator beat Hillary Clinton by big margins in Washington state, Alaska, and Hawaii. Sanders has now won 14 states. That just 4 fewer than Clinton. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, the war over the frontrunners' spouses is still front and center. Earlier, we spoke with CBS News contributor and Wall Street Journal columnist Peggy Noonan. I asked her just how badly this sort of dust-up, if you will, hurts Donald Trump, whom already lags nationally in support among women.
I think he is at a kind of inflection point right now in his campaign. He started out, he rose quickly, he's there, he's got 38 to 42%. Now, having established himself over the past 8-9 months, he ought to be broadening himself, not being eccentric and strange and shallow in his comments and your wife is ugly and tweeting and doing all that stuff he does. He should be making himself more serious, giving people a fuller sense of how his brain works in a serious way. He should be surrounded by serious people. He should be reaching out, that is, to people who are not necessarily in his 38 to 42%. I don't see him doing that, and it's what he must do to go forward.
Put another way, then, this idea of acting presidential. Against the backdrop of the past week, the attacks in Brussels, over the weekend even the attack in Pakistan, here are Ted Cruz and Donald Trump having this spat in social media. However, numbers suggest that perhaps acting presidential doesn't really even matter at this point. How much does it matter?
I think the key is not to act presidential, but be presidential. Show that you are a stable enough, serious enough person with a certain amount of depth to have people who are just starting to clue into things look at you and say, yeah, I could imagine him as president. I actually do think that's important.
Meanwhile, with regard to his foreign policy, long interview with the New York Times, he previously had called NATO obsolete. He's now suggesting that our allies perhaps need to pay the freight. There are times when Donald Trump speaks about foreign policy, there's a sense that he's filling in a Mad Lib, that perhaps he's making this up as we go along.
Well, he kind of says that. He said it last night on the Mark Halpern Showtime show. He said, Halpern said to him, so Brussels exploded, and how did you come to what you would say publicly? And he said, well, I consult my head and my heart, and then I come forward. Now, in one way, that's pure and good. It is genuine. And in another way, it's sort of, all of us would like him to be surrounded by smart, thoughtful people who can be helpful to him. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party if he can get support from people who do not currently support him. I am not sure with his current statements he gets there to support from people who've been holding back. That's extremely important to his future.
To not have this be a contested convention, he'll need to get to 1237. Obviously now, I think Ted Cruz and John Kasich are both using a contested convention perhaps as strategy. Now, and to that end, Donald Trump is now accusing the Cruz campaign of stealing delegates. When you look into it, the Cruz campaign is certainly seems to be focusing a lot on local conventions, state conventions, to actually go back in there and get those delegates. Is this... perhaps it's dirty pool in the eyes of the Trump campaign, but is Ted Cruz doing here simply what he needs to do?
Well, look, this is going to be very interesting. Trump doesn't seem to fully understand something. If he gets 1,237 delegates and they stick with him and he walks into the convention, he's got the nomination. If he walks in with 1,120, that means he doesn't have the nomination. That means it's Katie bar the door. There was a time in 1976 when Ronald Reagan was up against Jerry Ford, as you remember well. Ford walked into that convention with about 1,000 delegates. Reagan came in with about 1,000 delegates. Ford had more. Ford in the end won. But there was fighting and chicanery and rules challenges and voting challenges and all sorts of things on the way. That may happen with Trump if he doesn't have a rock-solid handle on his delegates and have the right number. If it happens with Trump, the question will be, do Trump's people have the savvy, the sophistication, the organization, the institutional depth to hold on to their people and seize new ones? I mean, the fact is, sometimes nominations are fought out on the floor of a convention. And Trump could lose without having been cheated. He could lose by having been successfully challenged. He ought to keep his mind on that.
I need to let you go. I guess we can end by saying, as much as you think, never seen something like this before, turns out we sort of have seen something like this before. Perhaps not like this, however. Peggy Noonan.
Not quite, but
Great.
I understand.
Great to have you.
Thank you very much, Josh. I hope we can do it again.
We will.